I'm Professor Gary Hulse. I'm Professor of Addiction Medicine at the School of Psychiatry based in Western Australia. I've been involved in this area for 40 odd years. It was difficult to know where to start in a talk about the cannabis and the cannabinoid system. I thought the easiest thing to start off with was to basically say that the CB1, CB2 receptors in our body don't simply exist so that individuals can get their hit from cannabis. Rather, they're part of a intricate system that are involved in development and cellular and organic organ maintenance. And like any other system, if we interfere with these, then we're likely to have negative outcomes occurring. This was just to remind people about the CB1 and CB2 receptors located in most organs of the body. And they carry out, as I said, maintenance function in the germ cells in our reproductive system. They carry out meiotic and normal mitotic activities. The thing that I need to reinforce about the endocannabinoid system and the way it works and the way that the exogenous cannabinoids are going to work on this is that you need to reach a certain dose before you actually affect a change, before you might start to disrupt the cellular machinery that's going on. This is something which is common to the range of cannabinoid CBD. It's basically because there's an volatile nuclei and they have a C structure which is common to all the cannabinoids across the board. If you can disrupt this, then you're going to get cellular disruptions. We don't have the mechanisms working properly to maintain cellular function. We can get carcinogenic activities. We can have neurotoxic, immunotoxic, genotoxic. Part of the difficulty is when the issues of cannabinoids arise and we listen to what governments or companies have to say, they often tell us that there's very little information. What we really need to do is more research. In actual fact, there's a flotilla of information already out there which needs to be synthesised and collected. What they would have you believe is like Mother Hubbard going to the cupboard and finding that it's bare, and that's simply not the case. This is just to let people know that the information we're going to be providing will stimulate independent thought. That's quite a dangerous concept for many individuals because people really like to move towards conformity and to follow the social norms. I thought, how do we get we get an explanation about the role of cannabinoids and our endogenous systems? And I thought, well, we could talk about congenital abnormalities, we could talk about cancers, and I just thought, listen, let's take a simple system. Let's take the reproductive system, something which is fundamental to the basis of life, and walk you through how important what the endocannabinoids, what your naturally occurring cannabinoids do, and then say what happens if we disrupt that system. We're going to look at the integral nature of the endocannabinoid system, and then what happens if we get exposure to that, and let's look at reproductive and what happens to transgenerational effects. Just a reminder that we have CB2, CB1 receptors in our ovaries, in the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum, this is the functional structure left after you have ovulation in the uterus, testes, prostate, and placenta. This was a seminal study which was done in 2020. And what it did was map the CB1, CB2 activity through different parts of the female reproductive path and look at what these systems normally do. It's a seminal paper. The reference is up there, and it does go to the heart of how important the cannabinoid system is, our endogenous one, to natural functioning. It actually mapped right down from the ovary right down your fallopian tube through the ampullorasmatic junction, where you get fertilisation right down to implantation in the uterus. And this is just a quick summary of that, and it's just telling us that, look, when you're getting your egg maturation, we have lower N-anandamide levels. They become high, and that's a signal for ovulation. And then when it enters into the oviduct, it's quite low when we have the sperm meeting our egg at the ampholyrismatic junction, we get fertilization, then a really amazing thing happens. We have an increase in the level of anandamide running down the oviduct until we reach a very rich part of the uterus where there's lots of blood supply. So it basically guides that fertilized egg down there. It's the green light to come down, and then when you get to this nice rich part, it turns itself off, and that's the signal for implantation. We disrupt that by putting in exogenous opiates, then that's when we get things like ectopic pregnancies occurring. So very intricate system, and then we get changes during pregnancy, which we'll talk about a bit later on. If we're talking about introduction of cannabinoids in and how it affects the morphology of sperm, we've known for years, since the 1970s, that the acrosome cap, this is the cap on the top which allows the penetration of the sperm into the egg. It's abnormally shaped and it doesn't function properly. Its little tail on the bottom is disfigured. It can't swim in a straight line. Obviously, if you've got these problems, then you're going to have fewer people impregnated. You know, if we were rocket scientists and we had a diagram of what our sperm should look like, or the rocket should look like, and it's not looking like that, you know, clearly something's going wrong. We've got a problem here. One of the things that was also found was that the gestational exposure of males exposed. So these aren't the males who have taken, these are the ones who have been in pregnancy at the time, so they're gestationally exposed. They also have effects. So they have reduced hypothalamic pituitary gonadal hormones, reduced sperm counts, and testicular weight. So this is something being passed on to the next generation. And this is an important issue because people often talk about their right to use cannabis, apart from the fact they're not picking up the healthcare bill. But it does raise the medico-legal issue of the right of the individual to use as opposed to the right of the unborn child, which is then being impacted by that use. This group, which was exposed in pregnancy, they have different methylated regions. Now, the methylated regions means that we have, the methylation is what allows that particular part of the gene to reproduce properly on our chromosome. And there was thousands of differently methylated regions in cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, nucleus accumbens. It's important to remember this because we'll come back. What we're finding with the epidemiology, of course, is that this cellular organ disruption is leading to congenital genetic neurological abnormalities and cancers. That's very clear from the epidemiology. And this epidemiology isn't new. The epidemiology showed this with congenital abnormalities from Hawaii many years ago in cannabis users. This is another seminal study which was done, and it's terrific because what it actually, we know that the genes are involved, and it looked at the genes of people who were dependent on cannabis. And what it found is that there was a whole range of genes which had been disturbed through it. And if you look at those genes and what they're responsible for, you can match this up with the epidemiological outcome. So all this is starting, this is in humans, this is not in rats. So we know these things are going on. What was even more disturbing was that the most severely affected genes in the sperm weren't from those people using, but those who had then been withdrawn. And that's likely because if we use cannabinoids, our receptors can't distinguish between the use of cannabis and endogenous anandamides, and so it thinks we're producing too much. You drop the bottom out of your naturally occurring anandamides, and then you take the cannabis away, and we've got no signaling going on there at all, and this was a real problem. So this was the Murphy and Scroll research groups. They showed there was changes in methylation over thousands of different regions to do it. And again, if you match up those, it relates to the epidemiological data of human development, congenital and genetic abnormalities that we're seeing. Should we be disturbed about this? Well, clearly we should be. This is something that really concerns me. This science that exists out there, people are often saying we need more information, we might need more science, but the science is already sitting out there, and yet We often have the monkeys, the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. We have a third one sitting on there that seems to be protecting their reproductive organs themselves. And so you can make this person who you want, perhaps politicians or others. But science is being ignored, and we need to garnish this science together and look. Those people who raise a voice, perhaps like ourselves, are often people want to silence you. We're raising issues of caution. There are probably three takeaway messages that I'd like to give. One is that we know that we have a biological clock. We know that there are certain cellular manifestations that we can use to measure the biological age of cells. And we know that people who use cannabis age more quickly, and therefore they get age-related disorders more quickly. This is unequivocal. We already know these things. It does it by unraveling and disrupting the mitotic and meiotic cellular reproduction. It exerts the genotoxic and the disruptions across the range of cannabinoids, CBD as well, because they all share this overtol nucleus, which has a C ring on it. And this is the component. Has this just been discovered? No, it was discovered back in 1977, and yet it's a piece of information that's been confirmed many times since then, but a piece of information which tends to be forgotten and dropped out. And like many substances which form homeostatic balances in our system, we need to reach a threshold before we have a switch-like effect where we get these effects occurring. And this is really important because some jurisdictions have at the moment gone down the path of decriminalisation of cannabinoids. Places like Colombia, Canada would tell us that they haven't increased the prevalence, the number of people using, nor the frequency, which might all sound very good. But if what we're doing is allowing companies to continually increase the amount of cannabis in each of the products we're going through, then we're reaching towards these thresholds, and these switch-like effects are going to come into action, and we are going to get congenital, and we are going to get cancers. And this is exactly what we're starting to see in the epidemiological data coming out. So with deregulation, genie already out of the bottle, for the sake of not only the current generation but also the future generations, the time to act is now. And it's a plea. We really do need to look at the existing science, take it seriously, and let it direct political decision making rather than commercialisation.